The morning sun spilled over the White House's south lawn as Karoline Leavitt adjusted the silver cross at her collar and stepped into the West Wing. Her press briefing was scheduled for 10 a.m., and she'd already rehearsed her answers to questions about inflation, border security, and the administration's new education policy. But before she could step into the press room, her personal phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated. Karoline rarely answered unverified calls, but something in her gut told her to pick up. "Miss Leavitt," came the deep, stern voice on the other end. "This is General Mark Milley." Karoline stiffened. She wasn't expecting a call from the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "What can I do for you, General?" she replied coolly, motioning for her aide to wait. "There's a briefing I need you to cancel," he said flatly. "You're walking into classified territory, and let's just say it's above your clearance. Drop the topic, or we'll have a problem." Karoline's eyes narrowed. "General, are you threatening a sitting White House press secretary?" A long pause. "I'm warning you," Milley said, his tone sharper now. "You're poking around where you don't belong. You may think the president has your back, but he won't shield you from what I can unleash. You're young, loud, and you're playing in the big leagues now." The line went dead. Karoline stood frozen for a second. Her aide approached, whispering, "Miss Leavitt, the press is waiting." She nodded, sliding the phone into her pocket. But something had shifted. Later that afternoon, while combing through internal briefings, Karoline found a redacted document referencing Operation Night House, a phrase she'd heard only once before, whispered during a classified military roundtable that she accidentally overheard 2 months prior. That night, instead of sleeping, she dug through every record she could access: emails, printed briefings, off-the-record notes from her predecessor. And there it was. Milley had signed off on covert military assessments contradicting the president's public policies. He wasn't just disagreeing, he was subverting. And now he was trying to silence her. Karoline Leavitt didn't get into politics to be silenced. If Milley wanted her quiet, he had picked the wrong woman. She wouldn't just speak, she'd expose. But she needed a plan, and for that, she'd need the spotlight. The next morning, she sent a message to Sean Hannity's team at FOX. "Ready to go live, topic, military overreach, full segment, no holds barred." Within hours, the headline was plastered across the conservative media sphere. "Karoline versus Milley, FOX exclusive coming tonight." It was no longer a warning. It was war. By noon, the Fox studios in Manhattan were buzzing. Producers scrambled between control rooms, phone lines lit up, and camera crews rehearsed every shot twice. The upcoming live segment was already being promoted as the biggest political confrontation since Trump's 2016 CNN walkout. The Chiron read, "Tonight, Karoline Leavitt breaks silence on General Mark Milley." Back at the White House, Karoline reviewed her notes alone in her office, bathed in the pale blue light of 2 monitors and the soft hum of her air purifier. On her desk lay 3 manila folders, each one stamped confidential. They were copies she had legally obtained through the Presidential Communications Office. Milley thought she was guessing. He had no idea she had his actual signature. Karoline stared at the top document, an internal military memo from 2 years prior, signed by General Milley, warning that certain operations in Eastern Europe directly contradicted the president's foreign policy commitments. Instead of raising concerns internally, he had communicated with Allied commanders in a back-channel forum. The memo contained phrases like preventative autonomy and administrative override. To Karoline, it sounded like an unauthorized foreign policy. That would be her opening shot. She slid the folders into her leather portfolio and stood up. Her red blazer was pressed, her cross gleaming at her collarbone. But this time, she wasn't just representing the administration. She was standing for accountability, not just political, but moral. "Black cars outside," her assistant called from the doorway. "Let's move." On the ride to Fox, Karoline reviewed the possible traps. Milley wouldn't sit by quietly. The Pentagon was surely watching, and if she slipped even once, disclosed one wrong detail, she'd be branded a national security risk. But she knew exactly what she was allowed to say. More importantly, she knew how to say it. As she entered the studio, Sean Hannity greeted her with a firm handshake. "You ready for this?" Karoline gave him a smile, sharp and fearless. He made it personal. "So yes, Sean, I'm ready." 10 minutes before they went live, Hannity's executive producer leaned in. "We just got word Milley's office issued a statement. It says, General Milley has no knowledge of any breach and warns the public not to be misled by media stunts designed to inflame trust in the armed forces." Karoline laughed under her breath. "Perfect. Now he's playing defense." As she sat under the blinding studio lights, mic clipped to her collar, makeup dabbed at her cheekbones, Karoline centered herself with a quiet prayer. Then, she glanced at the camera lens and rehearsed her first words silently. "General Milley warned me to stay quiet, but I won't, and here's why." The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The red light turned on, and America leaned in. "Good evening," Karoline began, her voice clear and firm as it rang through living rooms, bars, and social media live streams across the country. "I wasn't planning to speak on this tonight, but when a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs calls to threaten your silence, well, you either obey or you speak louder." The audience at home froze. Hannity leaned back in his chair, letting her take the floor. Karoline held up the first document. "This is a declassified memo, signed by General Mark Milley himself. In it, he references a covert briefing given to NATO officials without presidential authorization regarding American deployments in the Baltic region. That's not standard military advisory. That's freelancing foreign policy." Hannity's jaw tightened, clearly caught off guard. Karoline leaned forward. "General Milley told me, and I quote, 'You're playing in the big leagues now.' I have no problem with the big leagues. But I do have a problem when unelected generals act like presidents." In a control room offstage, Fox producers widened their eyes. Twitter, now called simply X, was already lighting up with the hashtag number Leavitt versus Milley. "People say I'm too young, too brash, too outspoken. Maybe so," Karoline continued. "But I know this. America was never meant to be ruled from the Pentagon. It was meant to be led by the people, through their elected voice. And right now, the people deserve the truth." Hannity raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying General Milley bypassed the president?" Karoline didn't blink. "I'm saying Milley made strategic decisions based on his own judgment, not the commander-in-chief's. He withheld military dissent, manipulated briefings, and pressured junior advisors into silence. And when I started asking questions, he called me directly, told me to cancel my next appearance, told me to shut up." The Fox studio went completely silent. "And here's the thing," she said, pulling out the second document. "This one contains notations from Milley's aide, referencing domestic communication overrides. If I'm reading this right, he didn't just ignore policy, he tried to overwrite it." Hannity was nearly speechless. "Karoline, this is explosive." She looked directly into the camera, her cross catching the studio light. "It's not explosive, Sean. It's betrayal." That moment, sharp, unshakable, broadcast to millions, hit every news desk across the country within seconds. CNN issued a breaking news alert. MSNBC went live with a panel of shocked analysts. The Pentagon released a vague review in progress tweet. Trump himself posted on Truth Social, "Karoline is fearless. Milley better lawyer up." But Karoline wasn't finished. She leaned back in her chair, voice calm, eyes like steel. "They thought I wouldn't speak, that I'd fold. But I didn't get into politics to be anyone's puppet, especially not a general's." The red light on the camera stayed steady. And in living rooms from Iowa to Florida, Americans watched, stunned. As Karoline's words echoed through the news cycle, the Pentagon scrambled to contain the fallout. Within 20 minutes, General Mark Milley's personal press liaison sent a stern, defensive statement to every major outlet. General Milley categorically denies making any threats to Ms. Leavitt and rejects her claims as misinformed political theater. He served this nation with integrity and will not be baited into media-driven ambushes. But Karoline anticipated this. She expected denial, She expected spin. What Milley didn't expect was what came next. She leaned forward again, her tone sharper now, holding up her phone for the camera. "Since General Milley says this is political theater, I'd like to share with America a voicemail I received 4 days ago." Hannity blinked. "You're serious?" Karoline nodded. "Very." She pressed play. The studio speakers, toned for broadcast, carried Milley's unmistakable voice. Low, gravelly, firm. "Karoline, this is General Milley. I heard you're planning to bring up that memo on FOX. I'd think twice. You don't want to start something you can't finish. Stay in your lane. That's a friendly warning." The room froze. Hannity, visibly stunned, cleared his throat. "That, sounded pretty clear." Karoline muted the phone and looked directly into the camera. "He calls that integrity?" Online, chaos erupted. X, formerly Twitter, exploded with posts. Our Milley warning began trending. Clips of the voicemail circulated within minutes. The voicemail, raw and unedited, stripped Milley's defense of any pretense. His denial was now contradicted by his own voice. Meanwhile, Milley's team scrambled. An aide called Fox demanding the voicemail not be replayed. Fox refused. CNN reluctantly aired the clip. MSNBC tried to downplay it, but couldn't avoid the explosion. Newsweek ran the headline, "Karoline drops voicemail bomb, Milley cornered," and then, at 9:32 p.m., Milley made the worst move possible. He called in live. Fox producers almost said no, but Karoline smiled. Let him speak. He appeared via phone, voice tight. "Let's be clear," Milley said. "That voicemail was taken out of context. I was offering advice, not issuing a threat." Karoline cut in sharply. "Telling me to stay in your lane isn't advice. It's condescension from a man who's forgotten the Constitution." The line went dead. Milley had hung up. "That's what I thought," she said, her voice calm, victorious. The crowd in the FOX studio broke into scattered applause, and the nation, still glued to screens, began to realize this wasn't just a press secretary with a flair for headlines. Karoline had just dragged a retired general into the political ring, and he was already losing. The next morning, Washington, D.C. was ablaze. Karoline's explosive broadcast dominated every headline. By 7 a.m., congressional phones rang off the hook. Journalists hovered outside Senate offices. And inside the Capitol, two factions rapidly formed. Those who stood with General Milley, and those who now feared Karoline Leavitt more than they ever had. Representative Jim Jordan stepped up first, his voice firm at a press briefing. "That voicemail speaks for itself. If a retired general is using his legacy to intimidate public officials or interfere with oversight, we need hearings, and we need them now." In the Senate, Josh Hawley tweeted, "Karoline showed courage. The Milley memo raises serious constitutional concerns. Congress must investigate." Even Democrats hesitated. Some dismissed the voicemail as harmlessly paternalistic, but others, particularly moderate voices, warned against appearing to defend threats. By noon, House Speaker Mike Johnson called for a closed-door hearing. Not about Karoline, but about Milley. A subpoena for his NATO memo was drafted within hours. At the White House, President Trump was jubilant. "This is what we've been waiting for," he reportedly told aides. "She stood up to the generals, and they blinked." Karoline, meanwhile, wasn't celebrating. She was preparing. That afternoon, she walked into the Capitol carrying a white folder packed with hard copies of Milley's NATO briefing notes, communications logs, and timeline records. Fox cameras caught her entrance. Live. "She's not letting this die," the host whispered as Karoline passed security. Inside, she met privately with Jordan, Gates, Stefanik, and other key figures. Her plan wasn't just about vindication, it was about accountability. "They're not afraid of generals," she told them. "They're afraid of exposure. That's why they want me silenced." Outside the building, protesters had already gathered. Some held signs that read, "Back off our soldiers." Others waved Karoline for Senate banners. The clash of loyalty and truth was becoming undeniable. That night, on Tucker Tonight, Karoline appeared again, not as a guest, but as a force. She recounted the hearing prep, laid out the memo chain, and then calmly said, "If the military forgets who they serve, they cease to be defenders of freedom. And we have a duty to remind them, with facts, not fear." Viewers at home sat stunned. Even some of Milley's longtime defenders were now silent. Karoline hadn't just turned Milley's warning upside down. She had turned the nation's eyes toward the one question no one in D.C. wanted to ask out loud. Who's really calling the shots? At 8:13 the following morning, a PDF file leaked online, and it was the final crack in the dam. Titled, Strategic Advisory Outlook, Domestic Stabilization in Post-Trump Scenarios, the internal memo carried General Mark Milley's digital signature and bore the seal of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Though not classified, it was labeled for internal advisory use only. Inside were unsettling phrases. Increased polarization may require coordinated messaging control. Civilian figures with broad youth appeal, particularly those under 35, must be monitored for narrative disruption. Press secretaries who promote destabilizing rhetoric may require counter-narrative containment. That last line? It had been highlighted in red, and someone, likely a patriot inside, had leaked it to a conservative news source, who handed it straight to Karoline. She didn't wait for another studio segment. She went live on her X account with the caption, "He said I made it up. Here's the memo. Read it yourself." The post hit 1 million views in under 10 minutes. By lunchtime, number contain. This was trending. Major media outlets scrambled. CNN offered the Pentagon a chance to clarify. They refused. MSNBC went quiet. The Daily Beast called it an unprecedented breach of military neutrality. Trump shared the post, simply commenting, "They tried to silence Karoline. Instead, she's silencing them." Inside the Pentagon, chaos ignited. An internal review began immediately. Milley, already under fire, had to call in legal counsel. At Fox HQ, Hannity couldn't hide his shock as he read the memo live. This is beyond politics now. This is institutional arrogance, exposed by a 27-year-old woman with a spine of steel. Karoline, meanwhile, kept calm. She released a short video standing in front of the Capitol steps. Her voice was level, not emotional. Her tone was legal, not theatrical. This isn't about left or right. It's about the Constitution. When a general labels elected voices as destabilizing, when he targets Gen Z for narrative disruption, that's not defense, that's control. And I don't care how many stars he's worn, he doesn't get to rewrite the rules. For the first time, even Democrats hesitated to defend Milley. Karoline had made it impossible. The memo wasn't vague. It wasn't theoretical. It was strategy, designed to suppress dissent. And Karoline, with nothing but her voice and her evidence, had turned it against its authors. America had seen generals as untouchable. Now, thanks to her, they were under a microscope. And she hadn't even started her full testimony yet. The subpoena was official by dawn. Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary and the woman who had just upended the Pentagon, was summoned to testify in a closed congressional hearing scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. But when Karoline arrived at the Capitol that morning, the energy outside felt more like a public rally than a government proceeding. Hundreds had gathered on the Capitol steps, some waving American flags, others holding signs that read, "We stand with Karoline, the Constitution over generals, truth doesn't need rank." Inside, the corridors buzzed, reporters swarmed for a glimpse, congressional aides whispered, staffers ducked into rooms clutching phones. Even hardened veterans of the Hill could sense it. Something seismic was happening. Karoline walked in wearing her signature navy suit, a simple silver cross pinned at her collar. No entourage, no flash, just the original folder, now thicker under her arm. Representative Jim Jordan greeted her outside the chamber with a nod. "You ready?" he asked. She replied without pause. "I was ready the moment he called me a threat." Inside the hearing room, it wasn't just Republicans seated around the curved table. Several Democrats had shown up unannounced, curious, skeptical, but present. And in the gallery above, Pentagon officials took quiet seats, clearly uneasy. Karoline took her place at the witness table. No nerves, no stalling, just clarity. She began with the voicemail, then the memo, then the attached NATO strategy documents. Each point reinforced not with accusation, but with timelines, source codes, and archived references. The room fell silent as she concluded, "When unelected power tries to silence elected speech or manipulate public trust, it's not defense. It's subversion. I don't care if it's coming from a journalist, a CEO, or a four-star general. That is not who we are as a republic." A stunned hush followed. Then, unexpectedly, a Democrat, Representative Jared Golden of Maine, spoke up. "Miss Leavitt, are you implying that General Milley violated his oath of service?" Karoline didn't blink. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating that he used his influence after retirement to promote an internal framework that targets speech. And yes, when that speech is constitutionally protected and when that targeting is deliberate, that does violate the spirit of the oath." Silence again. Only this time, it held respect. Karoline didn't yell. She didn't grandstand. She simply spoke, armed with facts sharper than any headline, and confidence forged in the fire of a public crucible. By the time she finished, even her detractors looked cautious. The hearing ended in quiet murmurs, but the damage, to those who had tried to smear her, was irreversible. She had walked in alone, and walked out with the room. Karoline didn't hesitate. With the weight of the entire nation's attention pressing down on her, she reached into her folder and pulled out the classified documents Milley had never expected anyone to see, let alone confront him with live on air. She stood tall, her posture unshaken, and held the first page up for the cameras. It was a Department of Defense directive, signed and dated, authorizing surveillance on domestic figures without civilian oversight. Karoline's voice, cold and precise, echoed through the room. "You said I crossed a line," she began, looking directly at Milley. "But here's what you crossed. The Constitution." The audience gasped. Milley stiffened, blinking hard. His composure began to crack. She flipped the next page. It detailed an off-the-books conversation Milley had with foreign officials during a volatile period, completely outside the chain of command. "You accused me of undermining the military, but these pages show who truly did." She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Her calm fury was louder than any raised voice. One of the anchors whispered off camera, "Are we even allowed to air this?" But the feed stayed live. Karoline turned toward Milley. "You threatened my career. You called me reckless. You questioned my loyalty. But everything I've done has been to protect this country and the people who deserve the truth." Milley tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The camera zoomed in as Karoline laid the documents flat on the table between them like a final blow. "You don't get to intimidate the next generation. Not with fear, not with rank, and not with secrets." Silence followed, so heavy it rang louder than applause. And Karoline hadn't even turned the last page. General Milley sat motionless for a moment, as if the air had been knocked out of him. His hand hovered over the table, not to grab the papers, but as if searching for a response that refused to come. His years of service had taught him how to dominate a room, but in this moment, it was Karoline who commanded it. The anchors didn't cut to commercial, the cameras didn't pan away. The nation watched, riveted. Karoline didn't let up. She leaned in slightly, her voice lowering but gaining even more weight. "You once said the military should never be politicized. Yet these documents, your own directives, show how you bypassed civilian control for political convenience." Milley's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Karoline lifted a third page, a confidential memo about the suppression of internal dissent among military ranks. "You called me a threat to order, but what you did was silence those who disagreed with your private agenda. This isn't discipline, it's censorship." Reporters in the room exchanged glances. Some began typing furiously, knowing history was unfolding before their eyes. A veteran producer whispered, "She's flipping the script in real time." Karoline placed the memo beside the others. "I didn't come here today to be bullied. I came to show what happens when power forgets its purpose. And no matter how high your rank is, sir, You don't get to rewrite the rules. Milley's face flushed with something between anger and disbelief. He reached for a glass of water, but his hand trembled. She turned to the audience. Leadership isn't about control, it's about accountability. You taught us to obey. I'm here to remind you, we also have the right to speak. The room remained frozen, the stillness interrupted only by the blinking red lights of the live cameras. Karoline stood steady at the podium, the documents still splayed before her like evidence at a courtroom trial. General Milley had said little since she revealed the memos, but his silence spoke volumes. America had watched a decorated military leader falter, not under enemy fire, but beneath the weight of truth. She looked directly into the camera now, her tone even and resolute. For years, we've been told to trust the system. But what do we do when the system hides behind power and rank? We speak, we question, we expose. Behind her, a producer signaled that the broadcast had reached record viewership, more than 4 million live viewers. X was on fire. Hashtags like Dow Karoline slams Milley and Dow Docs on the table were trending worldwide. Screens lit up across the country with her face, her cross necklace, and those 3 damning pages. General Milley shifted in his seat, clearly rattled. He leaned forward, finally finding words, but not the ones he'd planned. You're wrong about everything, he muttered. Karoline didn't blink. Then explain it, she replied. But he couldn't, not without confirming her claims. Reporters surged forward. Questions rang out. General, were you aware of this directive? Ms. Leavitt, will these be submitted to the Oversight Committee? She raised a hand, calming the room. They will. Transparency doesn't end here. It starts today. That line alone echoed across social platforms, instantly turned into quote cards, retweets, even digital posters. It starts today. By the time she stepped off stage, even critics admitted something had shifted. Milley avoided the cameras, escorted out by aides, but Karoline paused for one last photo, the document still in her hand, her eyes fierce, her cross catching the light. A symbol now, not just of faith, but defiance. Backstage, her phone buzzed. A message from Trump's inner circle. He underestimated you. They all did. You just made history. And Karoline knew it. Not just because she stood up, but because she'd made them listen. In a world where power often hides behind polished uniforms and closed-door meetings, one woman stood up, not with rage, but with truth. Karoline Leavitt didn't just challenge a 4-star general. She challenged the silence that so often protects authority from accountability. She reminded America that no title, no clearance level, and no medal is above the Constitution. By exposing what others feared to even whisper, she transformed a threat into a platform, a file into a flag, and a press conference into a movement. From Capitol Hill to living rooms across the country, her stand became more than a viral moment. It became a symbol, not of defiance, but of leadership. And as the dust settled, one thing became clear. This wasn't just Karoline's victory. It was a wake-up call to anyone who still believes truth has a rank.